doing? What is that?
We are talking the 2003 movie Leeches. Now this one is directed by David DeCoteau. If you are familiar with David DeCoteau, you know he has directed a number of B-movies, a lot of them for Full Moon Productions, and he has also directed a number of porn films as well. David DeCoteau clearly loves those hunky boys, and in most of his films he'll find an excuse to have hunky boys kind of strip off on the camera to oogle their flesh, and that is true of this one, but at least this one is somewhat kind of worked into the story, as the story focuses on a swim team of a local college who are doing steroids to improve their performance. However, the leeches in the kind of a local swimming hole or river or something are feeding on these athletes and thus growing into kind of monstrous sizes, and it's accelerated when there is an investigation into suspected steroids, and they dump all their drugs into the kind of the local water system, and this killer leeches get even bigger, even more aggressive. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So David DeCoteau, as I've mentioned, he has quite a prolific film resume, and a lot of his films tend to follow a very kind of basic pattern, and a lot of his films, as I say, tend to kind of just be an excuse to have young actors strip off and the camera follow them around, and then a kind of loose story around them. This one at least has a little bit more of a semblance on the story. It's not actually written by DeCoteau, perhaps that is why. We even have a subplot here about a murder and the kind of a cover-up of drug use, things like that. So there is a little bit more plot kind of going on here, and at least as I say, we have a reason for all these young men to kind of strip off, as they are in a kind of a swim team, I suppose. David DeCoteau definitely has a type, however, since all the actors look practically the same. It's very hard to kind of tell who is who. Can I say anything else that kind of maybe works in this movie? The actual use of practical effects, I don't think is too bad, to be honest with you, and the thought of giant leeches is pretty disgusting, and there's one or two shots where I feel the effects work isn't too bad. There's a scene where a woman is garroted, which I thought was quite well done, and there's a scene as well where a guy kind of just coughs up loads of blood and ultimately a huge leech, again, which I thought the actual effects work were reasonable there. The actual plot is pretty kind of easy to follow, if that's a kind of a compliment for a film. And it's all very much lots of kind of attractive people. If you like the kind of like the OC and all those kind of like melodramatic teen dramas, there's lots of kind of attractive kind of model types to look at if you like that kind of thing. I think the movie has a reasonable idea. I mean, giant killer leeches is a fun B-movie schlocky concept, and there is a kind of a terrifying thought if you kind of you imagine the possibilities. But that brings me into maybe what doesn't work, because I feel the movie really squanders the idea to some degree. Having kind of giant leeches, and especially I would say in 2003, when it's effects are at a reasonable kind of standard at that point, it really could have lent into having some really kind of quite gross out effects. Now, I think maybe you would, if you put this against like a movie like Ticks, for example, which really kind of led into the kind of the grossness and became a little bit of a kind of a cult favourite, whilst this one doesn't go anywhere near that kind of film, to be honest. And it's a shame, because the concept is very similar in some ways, and I feel you could have had a movie that was really kind of leaning into the kind of the gross kind of body horror and stuff like that, but it never really does that. Outside of a couple of scenes I've mentioned, unfortunately the leeches kind of look a little bit just like rubber slugs being pulled on a bit of string, or kind of like a hand puppet crawling up, people's legs and things like that. So the effects work here is a little bit of a disappointment, and it could have been done a little bit more gratuitous, more kind of like graphic, and kind of certainly more gory, I would say, in regards to the kind of the horror elements of the actual movie. the thing that I think that bothered me the most maybe about this film was that horrible editing. Whenever we have a leech attack, we sometimes, for some reason, kind of get strobe lights, very kind of quick cuts, and as I say, we don't really get any type of real gore, and then we sort of see the kind of like a close-up of kind of like a leech kind of mouth and things like that. But it's done in a kind of like smash cut kind of MTV style, which really makes it a bit of a silly experience, to be quite honest with you. And as I say, any kind of tension is just sort of sucked out the room by these kind of like horribly sort of shot and edited attack sequences. And they kind of it's happened nearly every time as well. Every kind of attack has kind of done that, and it kind of ruins it. Maybe I can, I can forgive one of these sort of edits, but practically every time a leech attacks, it kind of just goes into this weird kind of edits and stuff, and with blaring music, and it just ultimately undercuts any kind of real horror that the movie maybe could have had. As I've said, the cast here, Dakota's clearly got a type because they practically look all the same. I couldn't tell. They've got the same haircuts, everything. They kind of look like the same character, just it's like clones. And I'll be honest with the acting here is a little kind of like wooden. The characters aren't particularly kind of fleshed out as you'd probably expect. It's all there's lots of instances here where bodies just kind of seem to not leave any kind of evidence behind and things like that. And there's we're talking about giant leeches, not kind of a killer who can clean up after himself and things like this. And there's lots of kind of instances where stuff happens and think, well, surely someone would know or kind of or realise, or when a leech attacks, it's not going to kind of cause you to kind of like fall over and things like that. Ultimately, it's kind of just a lump of jelly, but pretty much. So there's lots of kind of silliness, to be honest, with kind of like paper thin characters, fairly kind of generic plot, fairly kind of poor acting, and ultimately what it could have succeeded in would have been the kind of the horror elements and the grossness. I feel it's a little bit more accessible than some of Dakota's films, to be honest with you, and does play like a somewhat more of a kind of a straight kind of movie rather than his clearly homoerotic kind of softcore movies that he has done kind of previously, even if they're not portrayed as an out-and-out porn film, as some of these movies might as well be. This one at least doesn't kind of have that, and you can watch it as a kind of a silly kind of B movie. But it doesn't really have any kind of thrills in it. It's not particularly kind of exciting or imaginative in regards to any of the kind of like the possibilities that killer leeches may have. So ultimately, it's a little bit of a missed opportunity at the end of the day. But it's outside of the horrible editing sequences and things, it's relatively kind of well shot, I suppose. But it's really not a particularly kind of fun movie to watch. I'll give it a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.